Hello and welcome to the channel. My name is Michael Mon, owner-operator of Studio M Mastering. Today we are going to cover the basics of mastering. We're going to cover what processes, what steps I go through with every master that comes into Studio M Mastering. There are roughly 5 to 7 steps that I take every single time. Every project's different, but we're going to cover those 5 to 7 steps. And we'll get to that right after this. Again, my name is Michael Mon, the owner-operator of Studio M Mastering, an affordable online audio mastering facility in Provo, Utah. Today we're going to be covering the basics of mastering. We're going to cover the steps that I take for each project. The first thing I do is I ask the clients to send me the mixes at their project bitrate and sample rate. So if you recorded at 24-bit, 44.1 kilohertz, then I would ask for the mixes at that native rate that you recorded at. I'd rather be the one to do the down mixing and things like that. So if you recorded at 2448, 2496, you get the idea. So with that, once I get the files, and I'll show you how I do this in just a minute, we'll get into the workstation, but I set up a session with each of the files. I ask the client to provide me with the song order, song names, and so then I can set up the session. Once I've got the session set up, then I take a first pass listen. And what that really means is I'm just going to sit back, I'm going to become the average listener, or I'm going to try to become the average listener. I don't want to make really any judgments about what I'm listening to. What I'm doing is I am setting up and just listening and going, what are they trying to tell me? What is this mix telling me to do? And I'm not going to make any judgments other than, is this mix aggressive? Is this mix real low-end heavy? Those kinds of things. And that's it. That's what I'm doing in that first listen. And I just take a listen through the entire project. Just one pass, just kind of listen to how the songs kind of flow together, to see if there's a cohesive element throughout the entire album. So if it's a one song thing, then it's just a single song. I'm just focused on that one particular thing. If it's a 2-song, 3-song, 10-song, I think the longest I had was 96 songs. But 1 through 96, I listen through and just see, okay, here is the overall feel for that particular project or that particular record. I might use some old terminology in records and CDs and things like that. Nowadays, it's all digital files and some actual records. But so I take that listen and I'm just trying to make a judgment without making individual judgments, without going and saying, oh, these frequencies are bothering me. This isn't going to play here or here. I'm just listening. What did the mixer, what did the artist, what did the producer try and convey in the project that they gave me? And then once I've done that, once I've listened through the entire project, then I move to the next level of listening. Then I go into, and usually on my info form that I have that people fill out online when they send me a project, what I have is I ask them, what is your favorite mix and why? And on that form, when they tell me, let's say it's song number 3 of their CD or their album, when they say, you know, whatever song it is their favorite, and they tell me, oh, we loved just the overall balance of it, that becomes my guide song for the project. So then what I do is I start with that particular song. I get their favorite song. It obviously evokes something in them. It makes them feel good. There's something cool, unique, interesting about that. And I'm listening to that particular song, and I'm going to try and listen based on what they tell me. This is what they want. This is what the client wants. Because when you're in mastering, it's not about me. It's not about the mastering engineer. My job is to take what comes in, enhance it without placing a stamp on it. So what I do is take that best song and I start with my mastering there. So I have the client says, song number 3 is my best song. So then I start. And once I start, I get in and I start listening really intently. Are there frequencies that are kind of jumping out at me? Something that's maybe not right or technically right. And so you'll see through the process, because we'll jump into the DAW here in a minute, and we'll go through a in-the-box basic setup. I have some mixes that were basically mixes that I did right after I finished recording the vocal on my old band, because, you know, copyright. So basically we finished tracking the vocal. These are the board mixes, but I figured they're pretty decent. We'll pop them in. They have dynamics left in them and all of that stuff. So I can show you some of the things with them. But each song, we start with the listen of the overall project. Then I focus on the song that the client tells me, this is the song, and this becomes the gold standard for the album, for the project. And, you know, I've asked them, and I typically will ask them, did you reference anything while you were mixing? A lot of times when I mix, there's a vibe that I'm going for. And so if I'm mixing like a rock thing and it's like, oh, I really love, you know, this Radiohead tune, I might reference that Radiohead tune just to listen to and from, especially if I'm in a studio that I'm unfamiliar with. I have some reference songs that I bring in just to listen to the speakers, but then there's also this, I'll pop that in and out and listen to it and go, okay, yes, I'm in the range of the low frequencies. My balances are in this lane, in this thing. And so I, you know, when I'm mixing, that's sometimes what I do. And so I ask the artist if that's what they did. And if they did, then I will reference that material also prior to starting the project. So once I get that key song and I start with a surgical EQ. I start with a colorless or semi-colorless EQ. I go in and there are frequencies that might not play well on multiple systems. Sounds good on one, maybe might overshadow another. And as long as I'm not doing harm. So I'll go in and with that surgical EQ, I'll drop a couple of frequencies that just tend to be, you know, the ones that poke out to me. And when we're mastering, one of the things that we're trying to do is we're trying to fix maybe a couple of things that are wrong, that are technically wrong. Not necessarily, I'm not saying, oh, I need the snare to be louder. I need the vocals to be louder. That should be done in the mix. Mastering is that last 5 to 10, maybe 15%, but it's really, the better the mix, the better the mastering job, and the more that it feels like a mastering enhances. So when we're in there, I've got my surgical EQ, and the surgical EQ is just basically, I need a narrow Q, and I need something that has multiple frequencies, and hopefully doesn't impart character or very much character, because every piece of equipment, even every plugin, has some sort of character to it. Some more than others, but every single thing that you insert tends to change the sound just a teeny bit. Mastering engineers, we tend to build a chain, our outboard analog gear, because we want a character coming out from our studios. We create one really quality chain, and we have a few options that we can bring in and out, because a lot of times in mastering, less is more. But we have that, and that we're usually after a certain character. But with my first EQ, I don't want that to do anything. I'm going in and I'm going to, hey, there's this frequency, and if I clean up a couple dB here, and that's usually in mastering, if you're going more than 2 dB plus or minus, you've probably gone too far. It may sound good in the moment. Tomorrow, you're probably going to hate it. And that's one of the first things that I learned when I was mastering, was less is more. So I get that surgical EQ, and I go in and I fix the couple of minor problems. And when I say problems, it just means these are things that make it so that it maybe doesn't translate across multiple systems. I'm not saying, oh, this mixer sucks. I'm not saying the mix sucks. I'm just saying there might be a couple of frequencies that are just sitting there making the mix not as translatable as it could be. Then after I've done that, I'll really look at the dynamics of the song. On my form, I ask the clients, how loud do you want it? Do you want it loud? Do you want me to use my best judgment, kind of boost it? I'm a big proponent of leaving some dynamics in the music. But we can make it super loud if you so desire. And then once I've looked at that, then I will look at, okay, as I've listened to this, and I've listened to what the artist is trying to tell me, what am I going to do to the dynamics? So that's when I choose the compressor that I'm going to use. In my mastering outboard chain, I have a couple of compressors. One's pristine and clean. I can compress the snot out of something and you couldn't hear it. The other one, a little more vibey, a little more aggressive. I can use the two in combination. So it's the same thing in the box. There are different compressors that do different things. Each have a different vibe. And so sometimes there's one compressor, sometimes there's two compressors. But it depends on what I'm looking for. If I'm looking for buzzword warmth, there are tube compressors that tend to impart that harmonic distortion that equates warmth. So I will choose in the box a tube compressor emulation that says, okay, here we go. I'm imparting just a little bit of that harmonic distortion to get what I'm after, to give that warmth. I find quite a few of the tube compressors, you're not really wanting to take down 6-10 dB of dynamics. That tends to be really aggressive. You're with a tube compressor, you're looking at 1 or 2 dB, maybe 3 of gain reduction, and you're really just you're creating a vibe with it. So a lot of times, if I'm really needing to add the character and the warmth, there are other units that are harmonic units that we can look at. But when I'm dealing with the dynamics, it's, will one compressor do? Do I need to do a touch of the tube for warmth, and then be a little more heavy-handed with a more transparent compressor? And that's why in my outboard chain, I have the one compressor that it can do anything. The GML 8900, it's most transparent compressor I've ever dealt with. It can really, really compress if I so desire. So it can really help bring things together, add a little more cohesion, because that's kind of what compression does, is it just helps add that cohesion to the mix. And sometimes when you're getting stuff from people, they've already done a little bit of compression, and so you're just having to touch it. So that's where like a tube compressor really is nice. Sometimes they've left the dynamics really wide, and in today's modern world with tons of noise, you're listening to music in the car, sometimes you need to bring up the low stuff and kind of, tuck it in. So once we've dealt with the dynamics, once we've figured out, okay, I've got the vibe of the mix and I feel pretty good. I've done this little surgical EQ. I've done the dynamics. Then I'll look at the limiter just to deal with, okay, do I need it just a little bit louder? And so we'll pop on a limiter and listen to the limiter. There's a couple that I use on a regular basis. One puts the upper mid-range a little more forward. The other one's a little more pristine, but sometimes that little bit of upper mid-range just tends to help pop vocals through and things like that. And then, we'll touch it up with that limiter and we'll listen. And then once we've done that, once we've gone through the surgical EQ, the dynamics, the limiting, and that's if it needs it. It may only need the limiter, and it may only need a little bit of surgical EQ. It may not actually need any other dynamics process than, you know what, we just needed a couple dB louder. So once we've done that, then I'll go back and I'll listen. So I'm now on pass number 4 or 5 on the song, and I'm listening to the loud parts and the quiet parts and hearing how my processing is listening, like going through the dynamics of the song. You've got your intro, then the verse, and then the chorus, and then, listening to if your bridge has a real serious breakdown, is my stuff breaking that down, ruining it, or is it working for it? Once I've done that, then I go back, and on that next listen, does it need any more EQ? And that's when I'll pop in another EQ. But this one I call my musical EQ. So I'm not looking for cuts at this point. I've already cut the things that kind of will affect the translation of the mix. What I'm looking for is there something that I could just touch? Upper mid-range, that 2K, 6K, 500 hertz, something in there. Can I just give it that little oomph? Does it need just a little air? Does it need a little lift? And so I'm looking at that 1 or 2 musical EQs, and in my rack I have 2 what I consider musical EQs, and they're completely different. And I'll show you, various ones in the box for me. But I go through and I do that musical EQ. And if it needs it, and that's the whole thing, does it need it? Does it need that little bit of, everything's sounding really good, it's really nice, but could it just use that little touch of whatever frequency it is, or a couple of frequencies. Kind of the, you know, there's the old adage, and I use Pultecs all the time, and I love Pultecs, but they kind of give you that smiley face radio sound. And sometimes the Pultec is the perfect thing for the musical aspect of your mix. So being able to drop in a little bit of the low frequency just to kind of give that kick maybe a little more weight, bring in some of the overall air with that, 12, 16K boost, and you're just doing a little shelf. On the Manly Pultecs, I love the Manly Pultecs because they have a couple of extra cut frequencies and a couple of extra boost frequencies than the standard Pultec has. And so sometimes I've found that on the Pultecs, on the Manly Pultecs, I wish I had them still. When I started out at a place called Super Digital up in Portland, we had the Manly Pultecs, and I found that there was a frequency cut I could do that was a shelf. So, I mean, it was cutting the high end, but then I could bring in just the next frequency range higher. And man, what a beautiful de-esser. It also really dealt with, like, you're dealing with like a punk band and you've got that guy that his hi-hat is just everywhere. I could really smooth that hi-hat out with that particular setting. But that's getting maybe a little more technical than I need to in this demonstration. But it's all about, does it need it? And am I going away from the original intent? So if I'm doing processing, am I enhancing this? But am I enhancing it in a way that keeps the overall tone, the overall vibe that the artist and producer were after? Because my job isn't to say, oh, Michael Mann, he's the king mastering guy. This is a artist whatever song that just sounds better and comes across in the best possible light that I could make it. So when I first was starting out mastering, that was one of the biggest things that was basically beat over my head. Because when I first started, there were a few projects that I did, and I had done a little bit of mastering before I got to Super Digital, but at Super Digital we had a really, really nice rack. We had a ton of outboard gear, plus we had all the plugins that you could imagine. And I remember there were a couple of projects when I first started that I'm thinking, oh man, I got the GML EQ, I've got the Manly Pultecs, I've got the Summits, I've got some Focusrite stuff, I've got all of this gear. And by the time I was done, I had stacked up this chain of about 10 different pieces of outboard gear. And at the time, I thought it sounded great. The next day, both the client and I went, what the heck did we just do? I think we might have taken this too far. And so the owner came in with me and we ran it back through, and he just was like pulling patches, and we got rid of 6 of the 10 pieces of gear, ended up with 4, and that project was totally revealing to me. It's one of those early mistakes where it was like, oh my gosh, I've got to use everything that's in this studio. And no, I don't. I just needed this, these 4 boxes. And even then, I might not have even needed the 4th box, but we did the 4th box and it sounded so much better. The client went away 2 weeks later, they were listening to it again, and they just were like, wow, the difference is such night and day. And now this is exactly what we wanted because it was our mix, just better. So let's jump into the DAW and let's look at the process that I go through with these couple of songs. We get the setup, and then once we've got the project set up, and I have it set up, so we'll jump into my setup, and I'll explain the setup, and then I'll just take you through fairly quickly a basic mastering. And I'm using headphones, so yes, I kind of know what I want, but it's going to be quick. It's not going to be perfect, but I will just show you at least what we're talking about. And so, yeah, let's get into it. All right, welcome back. We're here in the DAW. Pro Tools is my DAW. Been using it for quite a while and enjoy it very much. Like the GUI and things like that. Other people may or may not like it, and that's just fine. Everybody has their personal taste. So, got my session set up. 2 tracks. Reason I do it on separate tracks so I can have separate processing for each. Run them both out to the same bus, or if I was running to outboard gear, it would be the same output. I'm using this AUX here as kind of a emulation of what I would be doing if I was outside the box. And so I have just my basic setup here, and then I can do separate volume without having to automate. I can have a separate EQ if I need to do just some extra touch-ups per song this way. It's something I've discovered over the years that works really well for me. Let me play this song for you. Again, this was the right after we tracked. So we laid down the last vocal and just a couple minor adjustments and printed a mix just because sometimes those mixes, the energy and the sound and everything like that just tend to be great. So here we go. Take a listen. So like I said, it's just a board mix, no reverbs, no delays, just SSL console, compression, EQ, DBX 160s on the vocals, the VUs. Other than that, no outboard gear used. So we were working quickly. We used Neve pre's, so it sounds really good. And then just a quick print. So anyway, so that's the first song. So as I was talking about, I like to have a surgical EQ. The AMEC here, AMEC 200 from Plugin Alliance, and I subscribe to the Plugin Alliance plugins because I think they're great. And over time, I will buy the ones that I really like. I own the MOG and a couple of others outright, but as I get the vouchers and other stuff, which is really nice from Plugin Alliance, I will eventually buy the 20 to 30 that I use on a regular basis. So this is more of a surgical EQ. I tend to turn everything to a really narrow Q. So all 5 bands have narrow Q. The thing I like about this EQ is it has a built-in high-pass filter, and I'm able to put the high-pass filter where I want the high-pass filter. Right now, the high-pass filter is set to 26. I stay generally around 28 or below. Occasionally go up to 30. Usually the low frequency, the real sub That's just kind of the traffic noise going by when you record it and a whole bunch of other stuff. So there's really not a lot of really useful information down there. So I tend to run that high pass filter just by default. It also helps when you're cutting vinyl. I've never cut a vinyl. I've sent a bunch of stuff off to have vinyl done, but too much low frequencies, grooves too deep, you might cut a hole on either side. All right, so let's kick this in and out, and this high pass filter in. Let's just see if you guys can hear it. I don't know about on the YouTube algorithm, but I guess we'll see. So for me, it tightens up the real low frequencies. Not doing too much. We're going to kick in my 4 EQ cuts, and I'll kind of go in and out and maybe take a few of them in and out just so you can hear. Again, 1.5 dB, 2 dB, 1.7, and 1.9. So nothing above 2, just because I want to like it tomorrow. All right, here we go. So just everything's really, really subtle. I'm not trying to do anything drastic. Again, this is the surgical EQ, like as narrow Q as this will go. Occasionally I'll widen it out if there's something there, but I'm just trying to tuck in a couple of things. So from there, we move on to the compressor. And I quickly, like I said, I dialed in these settings for about 5 minutes. So nothing's perfect, but hey, it's what we got. It's a quick, good demonstration. So here is the surgical EQ is in. Let's just make this a little smaller so that we can see it. And then we've got let's turn this a little smaller. Okay. So here we go. We're going to kick it in and out. Volume's going to change a little bit, but you'll get the idea. So with this, again, it's just basically gluing the mix together. I'm running a medium attack, not super fast, letting the transients get through. Not a fully fast release. I didn't want it to pump. One of my big pet peeves is, and the song has a little bit of that already, is the cymbals kind of being a little whooshy. And that's just from my board mix and and just the compression that I used on the console where I might not have used it otherwise. Okay. So then here we go. We're into the limiter, just using the L2. I feel like they could use a little upper mid-range punch. So the waves L2 tends to do that. They have the L3, they have the L1, they've got multi-maximizers and all kinds of different stuff. There are a lot of good limiters. So it just totally your personal preference. And with this, I don't ever really push it super, super hard. This is about as far as I'll go. I'll do some other things to get there volume-wise if I need to, but this is just kind of the general -5 with half dB of ceiling, just so that I don't max out some of the streaming services and things like that. So here we go. Here's with the L2, and of course you're going to hear the volume difference, so it's all going to be like ooh, but here we go. All right, so that just kind of gives you the idea. It gets the volume up there a little bit. So the next thing I've got, I tend to like Pultecs, but there's something about the Moog Airband. And so with this particular EQ, I have just the 15K at 1.5 dB. Here we go. And you can hear what the airband does. And I'll kick it in and out. My pocket where I know I'll find them. I take on my pedals. There are days it rains down like it's fire from the sky. So then last but not least here, we have a Pultec style, and I'm only using the Pultec section of the Better Maker EQ. I could use a Pultec, but might as well use the Better Maker. All right, here we go. We'll kick this in and out and see. My pocket. All right, so now we're back to the beginning here as far as nothing, and then I'll just gradually turn them on. Let's close these windows out just so you can kind of hear what it originally sounded like, and then we'll bring them in. All right, so generally that's pretty good. I mean, it was super fast, but there'd be some more fine tuning, but then again, I'd be dealing with a mix that's a little smoother and a little better, but copyright we got to deal with. So anyway, so then this other track, let's just take a listen. through the processing.
It's a recurring theme as a Ponzi scheme you played until the end. I take my transgression not the way you've tried to hold me down. It's not to say I've lost my faith.
So the difference for me, vocals are a little bit louder, so able to turn it down through the clip gain a little bit. I'm down 1.8 dB. I tend to match my song volumes via vocals for a lot of it. And then there was just a little teeny bit of, I need a little more overall air. And so I'm boosting just a little bit there with this Millennium Media, and then cutting out around 400 to 500 hertz. And so, yeah.
Cause you're not 19 or a closet queen. This is a lonely holiday. This is my birthday, but it's not the way you've tried to hold me down. It's not to say I've lost my faith. It's not the way you run when I only holiday. This is my birthright.
So yeah, just spot checking and listening, but that's kind of how it's done. We do that 10, 15, 16, 96 songs, depending on the size of the project. But we would do that all the way through, and just kind of level matching is typically by ear. You can use some meters, but there's still some slight frequency differences. And so as we listen, so normally what would happen is I would take this, I would print it back into the session, and then just kind of go back and forth and listen just so that I could hear, and then just bringing them each back into the session and through my little controller, soloing out and listening to how it all goes. And then, that's how that works. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. My name is Michael Mon, owner-operator of Studio M Mastering, and it would be great if you would like and subscribe. Thank you.